We believe scholarships aren't just for the chosen few, they're for you. Because now, every qualifying new University of Phoenix student can get up to a $3,000 scholarship, starting with your first course. Scholarships for early risers, 9-to-5ers, and 5-to-closers. For everyone hard at work, no matter where you work. Because we believe in opportunity for all. Explore over $1 million in monthly scholarship opportunities at phoenix.edu.
Welcome to University of Phoenix Inclusive Leadership Summit. My name is Saray Lopez, and I am a director in the Office of Educational Equity. We are pleased to have you joining us today. We would like to again extend our gratitude to our sponsors, Diverse Issues in Higher Education and ETS for supporting this summit this year. You can go to the next slide, please. So as we begin this summit today, our last day of workshops, yet there's one more day of a career fair, we acknowledge that this event is being broadcasted globally. May we honor and give gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who were the original custodians of the various lands on which we live and work. We recognize that a land acknowledgement alone is insufficient, yet it serves as a starting point as we continue our individual journey toward racial equity. Here in Phoenix metropolitan area, we inhabit the Hohokam, Akimel O'odham, Pipash, and Yavapai land. So thank you for joining me and taking time to honor those original custodians of this land. If you can go to this next slide. So we hope that you've been enjoying this summit this far, and please note that the conversation does not end here. We must keep going on this inclusive leadership journey, and we hope to be going on this together. So join us on May 19th as we resume our monthly educational equity webinar series. This series creates a space to have crucial conversations, promote cultural understanding, and provide thought leadership. Together, we'll discuss how issues relating to equity and inclusion show up in the classroom, workplace, and our communities. You can scan the QR code here on the screen or register by clicking on the link that's provided in the chat. You may also visit our YouTube playlist to view prior recordings. That's added there in the chat as well. So we hope to see you all there on May 19th. If you can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So as a reminder for those joining us for the end that have been here with us throughout the last couple of days, and for those of you that are here for the first time today, we want to go over a little bit of the platform logistics. So the navigation panel on the left is where it enables you to switch between different areas of this virtual summit, including stages, networking, employer booths, and we highly encourage you to connect with one another. So the People tab is a dedicated area for one-on-one connections between attendees. And then the best part of this platform, I think, and it's something that I hope that you will all make use of the rest of this summit, and hope that you have been using it, is the networking feature on the left. This is a great way to meet with people within this Inclusive Leadership Summit. We have a global presence, and let's connect, let's network with one another. This is a space that we want to encourage further development, further growth. And so let's enjoy that, and let's leverage that opportunity. So if you want to go to the networking feature, it's definitely designed as a coffee in the lobby conversation, water cooler chats. You're randomly matched with different people for 5 minutes. So it's just a great way to have a quick conversation. If you want to extend your time, you can, or if you want to get each other's contact details and then further the conversation outside of the networking. But we definitely encourage you to take use of that. So now I will turn it over to my colleague, Tandra Richardson, Director in the Office of Educational Equity.
Thank you, Saray. If we can move to the next slide, please. So now that we've reached the final day of the summit, we did want to remind everyone and tell those who are joining us for the first time today that summit attendees who have joined us for all 3 days are eligible to receive the University of Phoenix badge, Inclusive Leader, Self and Social Awareness. Now, to be considered, please complete the post-summit survey provided later today and include your name and email address. If you're joining us for the first time today, or you just joined us yesterday, or for some reason you were unable to join us live for each day of the summit, we do want you to know that the recordings will be made available within the next week, and you still have an opportunity to earn the badge if you watch at least 3 of the recordings from each of the 3 days of the summit. We are so eager to receive your feedback and read what you've learned, so we hope that you all will take advantage of that opportunity. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so now let's revisit the ground rules as we move into the 3rd day of the summit. Listed here are guidelines we believe essential to fostering respectful conversations. Please consider that some of the issues presented may be challenging for you, and we invite you to allow yourself grace to feel uncomfortable. This enables us to create empathy and support for the persons and communities who are directly impacted by our actions. We do encourage you to share your experiences and your perspective in the chat box, but please contribute to an atmosphere of mutual respect and sensitivity. In addition, we highly encourage you to share helpful resources related to today's topic. One of the things that we've seen or we've realized is that our attendees and our participants have just as much knowledge and resources as the skilled speakers we have. So please feel free to share those resources in the chat. If we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so now for the good stuff. Final day of keynotes, right? So yesterday we had a panel of experts from different industries share ways in which we can lead with empathy and authenticity to overcome systemic inequities. They shared various strategies, including how to be an ally who shows humility, leveraging employee resource groups to create community and provide support, seeking mentors both inside and outside of your organizations, and the importance of DEI practitioners remaining inside of the systems that we are in so that they have that voice to help dismantle the system. I'm going to say that one more time. The importance of DEI practitioners remaining inside of the systems that we are in so that they have that voice to help dismantle the system. And finally, we were advised to lead with love instead of fear. So today's theme is fostering psychological safety. The term psychological safety was coined by Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson. She defines it as, I quote, a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Establishing a climate of psychological safety allows space for people to speak up and share their ideas. So as we close out the summit today, it is our hope that you all have noted key strategies for creating a safe and brave space where others feel comfortable to share, reflect, and contribute in ways that help foster belonging for individuals and welcome the diverse perspectives that help combat bias. We will now hear from Shannon Wilson, VP Application Engineering and Executive Sponsor of the African American Employee Resource Group at the University of Phoenix. Shannon will share a few remarks and he will introduce today's keynote speaker.
I'd like to welcome everyone to day 3 of the University of Phoenix's Inclusive Leadership Summit. My name is Shannon T. Wilson, and I am the Vice President of Information Technology here at the University of Phoenix. I'm going to kick us off today as we discuss fostering psychological safety. I'm going to talk about my journey here at the university, a journey that started over 28 years ago. For those of you doing the math, my tenure at the university started back in the fall of 1993. At that time, I just finished completing a bachelor's degree at Arizona State University, a first-generation college graduate. I was an information systems major, working full-time at a computer reseller, and the University of Phoenix was one of the accounts I supported. I was familiar with the team in purchasing and ended up taking a job on that team. I was going from selling the technology to the university to buying it. It was a great opportunity and would allow me to get my master's degree for free. All excited, I arrived for my first day of work, somewhat anxious, but mentally prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. I parked my car, rode the elevator to the top floor, perused the halls on my way to find my desk, and I noticed I was the only person of color. I noticed it, but to be honest, I really wasn't expecting anything different. I was born and raised in a small town in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a little war town. It was predominantly white, so that was typical of that environment. I figured the corporate America would be no different. I just finished my degree at Arizona State, where my school was paid for with the Maroon and Gold Scholarship, a scholarship aimed at attracting students of color to Arizona State. So I'm getting situated, I unpack my bag, I meet with my manager, and I start to settle in, get logged into the systems and start to snoop around, try to understand how the university conducts business. And within a couple of hours, I'm approached by my manager and one of the business leads, and they say, hey, we have just terminated 2 people and you're now responsible for the jobs that they were doing. We need you to go meet with a president of one of our colleges. And then I was told, you know, hey, here's the deal. You're not allowed to speak. Don't say a word. I think it's safe to say that situation did not make me feel psychologically safe. Fast forward 2 years, my MBA is complete. My master's thesis was done on the internet and how it would impact higher education. I'd received an exciting job offer outside the university and had tendered my resignation. When a few days later, I was summoned to Dr. John Sperling's office. Dr. John Sperling is the founder of the University of Phoenix. And upon entering, I noticed my thesis was sitting on his desk. He said, I think this is really good. I want you to reconsider leaving the university and help us with our internet presence. 2 weeks later, I moved out of purchasing into IT, information technology, the information technology department, and I've been there ever since. The first few years of that assignment, I worked with Dr. Sperling a lot, from meetings at his house here in Phoenix to trips to San Francisco. I learned a lot about him. He was a pioneer in many ways. He practiced many of the core traits of psychological safety. He was a brave leader. He wasn't afraid of tackling difficult challenges or taking a path that had never been traveled. He was very inclusive. He accepted anyone for the value that they would bring to each opportunity or each challenge that we were facing. And without question, he always challenged the status quo. Those interactions with him and a few early successes would frame the foundation of how I interact with everyone within my span of control or influence. Since those original meetings with Dr. Sperling in the early 90s, I've been employing many of the principles of psychological safety, practicing inclusion, embracing diversity, and doing things just a little bit differently. And I wanted to share 2 examples of such, examples that I believe highlight being brave, inclusive, and challenging the status quo. Early in my career here at the university, I was building a team of engineers. And I had an opening, and an individual had applied for this opening who I had rejected 2 times prior. And it was for an entry-level engineer. And the challenge that I was faced with was this individual was hearing impaired. And so I kept mulling through my head, trying to understand and figure out, like, how could I make this work? And I just kept coming back to the thought of why not? Why not? I knew it was going to be difficult, but the role itself was writing code. It did not have a lot of, internal customer interactions, but I kept asking myself, why not? Why can't you make this work? And so we ended up selecting this individual for the opening. And he started with our team, and he was very good at reading lips, but we knew that was not going to be enough. So I worked with the American Sign Language Association and Arizona State University, which was just right down the street, to get resources and students to help us cover for meetings and trainings and conferences. And those people would show up in time for us to have those sessions, and they could sign for us in real time. Fortunately, at the time, technology was advancing very rapidly, and Microsoft Messenger, or MSN Messenger at that time, had also become available. And so that was a tool that we had installed to allow us to communicate instantly, not only with just each other, but specifically with this employee who was hearing impaired. But at the time, excuse me, at the time, that too was a challenge. The Messenger application or tool was not approved. And so I had to go through a very formal and rigorous approval process to allow for HR and the technology teams to say that we were authorized to actually use those tools, which turned out to be hugely successful and was later adopted for the entire university. But this individual, as a part of our team, helped architect and build solutions that supported our strategic growth for more than a decade. And after 15 years with the university, he went on to become a director of IT and a professor at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. So that was, to me, was a very successful investment and endeavor for him and for us. More recently, another example more recently is I had a manager opening that we wanted to bring someone in that was more of a career coach to help our technical resources be the best that they could be. And one of the applicants that we were considering was an applicant that really had no recent leadership experience and absolutely zero technology experience. On top of that, the fact that you had no exposure or experience in IT, the applicant was a female and was of color. And not that those things matter, the female or of color, but you should state that in the technology realm, it's very male dominated. And so we were bringing on a coach, or the thought was to bring on a coach, but this person that we were seriously considering was not someone who had a depth of experience in tech and was also, a female. So it was really going to be what we thought was going to be, a little bit of a challenging situation. But what this person did bring to the table is she knew everything about people, psychology, and coaching. She was doctorate level prepared in educational leadership with a strong emphasis in adult education. And I'm excited to report that since joining the team 2 years ago, she's built a very strong technical foundation, taking courses in programming and deep diving with our technical talent. And the resources that make up her organization have some of the highest performance, highest morale, and lowest turnover in all of IT. And we are in the midst of the great resignation, and she continues to excel and has not lost any of her people. She's a trusted member of our leadership team and is considered to be one of our highest performers. But to get there, we obviously had to break the mold and go outside of what was normal and comfortable. And I hope these examples highlight the value of building psychological safety in your organizations, being brave, inclusive, and challenging the status quo, because it does have the potential to improve your organizations beyond what you believe is possible. Well, my time has come to an end. I'm excited to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. J. Luke Wood. J. Luke Wood, PhD, is Vice President of Student Affairs and Campus Diversity and Dean's Distinguished Professor of Education at San Diego State University. Wood also serves as the co-director of the Community College Equity Assessment Lab, a national research and practice center that partners with community colleges to support their capacity in advancing outcomes for the underserved students of color. Wood's research focuses on factors affecting the success of boys and men of color education, with a specific emphasis on early childhood education and community colleges. In particular, his research examines contributors like social, psychological, academic, environmental, or institutional to positive outcomes. Dr. Wood has delivered over 1,000 scholarly, professional, and conference presentations. His research has been featured by NBC, New York Times, Chronicle of Higher Education, Huffington Post, Fortune Magazine, Los Angeles Times, the Miami Herald, San Francisco Chronicle, C-SPAN, and National Press Club. Dr. Wood has authored over 160 publications, including more than 70 peer-reviewed journal articles and 15 books. Dr. Wood is a former recipient of the Sally Casanova Pre-Doctoral Fellowship, from which he served as research fellow at the Stanford Institute for Higher Education Research, Stanford University. Wood received his PhD in educational leadership and policy studies with an emphasis in higher education and master's degree in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in early childhood education from Arizona State University. He also holds a master's degree in higher education leadership with a concentration in student affairs and a bachelor's degree in Black history and politics from California State University, Sacramento. Luke is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I'm honored to introduce Dr. J.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and the examples and comments that were provided serve as a wonderful framework for the conversation that we'll have today on the topic of Racelighting. I saw in the chat and came across the screen just a shout out to the work that we've done with Black Minds Matter. For those of you who aren't aware, we have a Black Minds Matter coalition that has focused on addressing the parallels that we see between policing and schooling, and really highlighting the notion that in policing, we see that Black lives are undervalued and overcriminalized, and that in education, that Black minds are also undervalued and overcriminalized. And so appreciate the acknowledgement there. Before again, I want to thank several people for the opportunity to be able to be here today. That includes Jamal Watson from Diverse Issues in Higher Education, who is a longtime colleague and friend. Saray Lopez and Tandra Richardson from the University of Phoenix. They're doing great work, and I think this convening is a perfect example of the types of conversations that we have to have in order to ensure that our organizations are creating the types of environments that are necessary for everyone to learn, grow, thrive, and reach their highest level of potential. So today's topic is Racelighting, addressing inauthentic allyship. And for those of you who've never heard a conversation on Racelighting, it's a term that myself and my colleague, Dr. Frank Harris III at San Diego State developed. And essentially, it's when gaslighting is racial. And I'll talk about what that means. I'll provide a number of different examples. And ultimately, what we'll see is how that influences us within our organizations, and then some strategies and practices in terms of what we can do to ensure that we're creating the types of environments that are necessary for everyone to succeed. In terms of my information, it's here on the screen. I will be engaged throughout this conversation and after this conversation for the next several days on Twitter, on Instagram, and for those of you who are on Facebook as well. And it's all the same handle at Dr. Luke Wood. I look forward to engaging your conversations, engaging in any questions that you might have, and ultimately continuing this again as we move forward beyond this moment. So I wanted to contextualize this conversation on race and racism and Racelighting in our current time. We are moving from what people have referred to as the COVID pandemic to a COVID endemic, meaning that we are no longer in the pandemic period, but moving into a time where the experience of COVID-19 and its spread across our population looks different. And we have now, of course, vaccines that have been widely distributed and boosters. But let's look back over the past couple years. What has COVID-19 actually meant for people from minoritized communities? We know that in the current time, in the current past 2 years, people have talked about what were called the dual pandemics. The first was COVID-19, which bore disproportionate infections, loss of life, unemployment in minoritized communities. And if we think about what that experience looked like, it meant that there was a lot of trauma that was experienced by people who, as a result of this healthcare crisis, were not able to be bedside with a loved one as they were passing from this life to the next. They were not able to go to a funeral or a wake, to be in a community with one another and to share stories of a life that was lived and a life that was lost. In addition to that, The nation had a racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd and cases like Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and Ahmaud Arbery, which only further created dissension between Black communities and those who are sworn to protect them, particularly those in law enforcement. And as I mentioned before, with the work that we've done with Black Minds Matter, we draw parallels between these things. And we oftentimes have said in our work that Black lives and Black minds are intertwined. For if one does not value the life, then they certainly will not value the mind. This, for those of us who are in education, led to concerns about students having access to technology and basic needs. For those in healthcare, it was a crisis of a magnitude that most people could not even understand in terms of the level of care that needed to be provided and the strain on our systems. For those who were in business, they had to transition to virtual offerings and operate companies in ways that were never thought of before. It created persistent stress, both the COVID pandemic and the racial pandemic. And it created communal trauma. And we've seen a number of different outgrowths of this. One was the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color exodus out of colleges and universities, or many companies, the Great Resignation, as was mentioned right before this. And so we have to recognize that we're in a time, even though we have come out of the pandemic or are coming out of the pandemic, the strain, the trauma doesn't just go away, right? It's one that we are, as a community, as a nation, many of us are still grieving. Many of us are still processing the challenge of what occurred. And that is a context for us to then understand what is referred to as racelighting. And on your screen, you can see a screenshot of the racelighting process. And of course, I'm a professor, I'm an educator, and so I have to present a model that helps to demonstrate what we think is occurring. But let's begin on the far left-hand side of your screen with the antecedents of racelighting. And really what these antecedents are the parts of our society that influence the ways that we engage one another in our everyday lives. It is white supremacy, white nationalism, white fragility, anti-Blackness, which we've talked about as being a global phenomenon, because no matter where you go, anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity are present across the globe. And when we think about white supremacy, it refers to beliefs embodied within white culture that deem other races and people as being less dignified and less worthy. And more simply, it occurs when white people see themselves as superior to others. Now, white supremacy can also be advanced by non-white individuals as well, who also hold similar beliefs that individuals from the white community are of greater worth and are more worthy and are more dignified and more intelligent than others. We also know that white nationalism is linked to white supremacy in that when individuals have notions of a nation and state being tied to this idea of white supremacy, that it can combine in ways that lead to, like we saw on January 6th, an insurrection at the nation's capital. And oftentimes when we try to have conversations on these issues, there's a response from individuals that is defensive, that triggers a mechanism within them that some have referred to as white fragility. And ultimately, it also is related to anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness, as you can see here, is embodied lived experience of social suffering and resistance, and perhaps most importantly, as antagonism. Here's the key part, in which the Black is a despised thing in and of itself, but not of a person, herself, himself, or their self, in opposition to all that is pure, human, humane, and white. It is this notion that when we see people who are from my community, the Black community, that we are seen through the lens of being inhuman because our framework of thinking about our community within this nation is rooted in slavery. And when we think about our Indigenous community, it's to also think about the framework of these individuals as coming from a community that is also similarly perceived as being lesser than. And it's a unique historical background that must be understood in context of the genocide committed against Native Americans, the boarding school era, and how the perpetuation of certain types of oppression have continued to marginalize systemically Black and Indigenous people of color. But ultimately, when we think about those antecedents, they matter because they are elements of bias, right? They are informing a culture of bias. And there's different types of bias that people talk about. One type that individuals love to talk about is implicit bias. And we're going to get there because that's the one that people feel a little bit more comfortable talking about. But let's first start with explicit bias. Explicit bias is when bias is not subtle, it's not beneath the surface, it's explicit. There are overt and intentional beliefs that people hold that negatively view and characterize others. And not only that, that I see other individuals as being lesser than me, but I am also conscious that I see them as being lesser than me. And there's lots of ways in which we see examples of this explicit bias, this overt bias taking place. It's the individual who shows up to work and they go into the bathroom and someone has put a swastika on the stall. It's when you go to a college campus and flyers like the ones that you see here are flyered all over the campus by white supremacist organizations who are doing recruitment. In my line of work as a chief diversity officer, I have seen every single one of these flyers except for one, either on my campus or on other campuses that I have visited, because these issues are endemic to our culture. It is the person who overtly uses a racial epitaph and uses the N-word when referring to Black people. These are overt, they are in our face, and they are far more pervasive than they have ever been. It is also the white nationalist uprising that took place at the Capitol on January 6th. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see a shirt that was worn at that event that says 6MWE, which refers to the Holocaust and saying that 6 million weren't enough, referring to the 6 million the individuals from the Jewish community who perished during the Holocaust. And so this connection at the same time with wearing this imagery, but also carrying forth Americana with the nation's flag at the same time, the emergence of these two things together is one that we've seen is evident within our society. But what's really interesting is what came out in USA Today not that long ago. There was an article that talked about the number of hate groups in our nation. And it said that hate groups declined in 2021. That was the title of the article. But fringe ideology is a powerful force shaping U.S. politics, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And as you read further into this, you had to ask yourself, really, the number of hate groups has declined. Is that true? And they provided an explanation for why that occurred. They said that the decline does not indicate that the far right's power is waning, but rather it suggests that extremist ideas have moved from fringe groups to the political mainstream, meaning that you didn't have to be part of a hate group in order to have a hate ideology, because hate had went from the margins to the mainstream and become part of our regular culture, for what we see on television, for what's part of normal conversation. And I can say this, as a chief diversity officer, I have seen how hate has moved from those margins to the mainstream, where conversations across the country that disparage Black, Indigenous, people of color, people from our LGBTIQ plus community, people with disabilities have become commonplace. And that, I think, is something that we have to take into account and we have to change. But on your screen, you'll see two different definitions and one description of the other type of bias that takes place, which is implicit bias. Implicit bias is the attitudes or stereotypes, I'm reading the first description that comes from the Kirwan Institute, that affects our understanding, actions, and decisions in an implicit manner, activated involuntarily without awareness or intentional control. It can be either positive or negative, meaning that we can have positive biases that see some groups and see them as more moral, of greater worth, as being more intelligent, and then simultaneously see other groups and see them as less moral, as more prone to criminality and of being of lesser worth. And it says that in that definition that everyone is susceptible. It doesn't say that some people are susceptible. It doesn't say that most people are susceptible. It says that everyone is susceptible. That includes me. That includes you. That includes all the colleagues that we work with in our workspaces. And we have to keep that in mind because these elements inform our society. And if you look at the last definition or description, I bolded the phrase, it motivates actions. That's why it matters. It affects how we talk to one another. It affects how we engage one another in interpersonal relationships and nonverbal language as well. It affects how we think about our jobs. It motivates our actions in every single way. And that's why we believe that it's important to have conversations on this. And with implicit bias, one of the things that we have to separate is intent from impact, right? Because you can have someone who has a good intent, right? They are trying to do something that's right. Their intent is nice, it's pure, but their impact is still bad because if you're doing something from a standpoint of bias, it will affect every single way, those interpersonal communications, the ways in which you talk to your colleagues and to your friends. Now, I would say that there are other elements of this definition that are important, but I would encourage you to use your chat window and highlight any of the words that also stand out to you that might help to frame what is implicit bias and how does it impact the work that we do. So I will also say that there's a bolded word there in the center that says traces of past experience. Our implicit bias is informed by traces of past experience, meaning that the things that have occurred in our lives that we've experienced, that we've seen from other individuals. Let's say that you are a young child and you grew up watching the television that showed that we're searching for black male suspects, searching for Latino male suspects, searching for black male suspect. That was inculcated in your mind. Let's say that you were driving through a neighborhood with a family member, a friend, and you were in a part of town that you weren't used to being part of, and they told you to lock the door or roll up the window because they were concerned about their safety in that neighborhood, but it was informed not by actual incidents, but by stereotypes. Those instances that we have throughout our life shape how we think about and process information. And as we're engaging with one another, as we're talking with one another, what happens is that our minds fill in the blanks. It fills in the blanks with those traces of past information. And then we communicate those racist, sexist, homophobic ideas through what is called microaggressions. And that's what's in the center of your screen. Microaggressions is a term that was created by a Black psychiatrist from Harvard University, Chester Pierce. And Chester Pierce was writing, trying to describe the subtle, the mundane, the normalized everyday racism that Black people experience in the society, the Black indignities that occur in the lives and experiences of those who are Black students, those who are Black employees, those who are Black employers even, in every single way, those who work in healthcare and government and industry, just this notion that there's these common, these mundane, these everyday subtle indignities that occur. A number of years later, a scholar named Daryl Wing Su at a teacher's college took this idea of microaggressions and created a framework that helps us to think about some of the different ways that it applies both to the Black community, but to also other minoritized communities as well. And what he has done is he has said that really there are three different types of microaggressions, and there's lots of subtypes within that. But one is these microassaults, which leads and is most closely connected to that explicit bias. It's the use of a racial epitaph. This is swastika. It's a noose that's hanging around and put on someone's door. It's the explicit versions of racism. And I'll say how I grew up, the place that I grew up, I was used to these microassaults as part of my daily lived experience. I'm from far northern California, and I grew up in a wonderful community, but like every other community in this nation, it wasn't immune to racism. And as a daily experience from the time I was in kindergarten to the time I was in 5th or 6th grade, I was called the N-word. I was called a niglet. I was called a cottonhead. I was called racial epithets as part of my normal daily experience. But then as I got older, began to see that the racism that I experienced transitioned from being really in my face and really straight to the point to being more subtle and being more beneath the surface. And that's what we refer to as micro insults or micro invalidations, when we insult and we invalidate people and their experiences. And so what we know about microaggressions is that they are brief and commonplace. They're daily, they're verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities. That part of this, that they're brief and commonplace, means that they're pervasive, they're normal. And I don't say normal in the sense of it being okay. I mean, normal in the sense that these are normalized negative experiences that people have, whether they're intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. They can be the put downs, they can be the subtle snubs, the dismissive looks, and they can serve to invalidate people of color. But what's most important here is what's said by psychologists is that they can be more psychologically damaging than direct acts of racism. And I think that's important here for us to think about, because when I grew up and someone as a child, when I was in kindergarten, first grade, would call me the N-word, I knew what box to put that in. That's the racism box, right? And I knew as a child what to do to that. I'm like, okay, well, not inviting them to the birthday party, because I knew that they did not care about me and care about my success. But then as I got older and they became more subtle, right? And it was these dismissive looks or these small put downs, I didn't know what to do with that. And that comes to us and brings us to a concept called attribution ambiguity. And I want you to use that chat to type that in. Attribution ambiguity. Attribution ambiguity. It's a psychological term that refers to a sense of haziness or lack of clarity about what happened. And so if you're in a situation where somebody is complimenting you, but kind of putting you down at the same time, and you don't know where to place that, and you're saying to yourself, is it me? Did I misunderstand that? What do I do with that? How do I place that? That sense of haziness that comes along with that attribution ambiguity, that's what is occurring. And it's directly connected to this conversation on race lighting. Now, with microaggressions, we have to recognize that it's not what's said, it's what's really said. It's not what's said, it's what's really said. And I'm a call and response type of presenter. So I know that we are all watching this from a verbal, not verbal, but a virtual standpoint. So in the room, wherever you are, I would ask you to repeat after me, because it's not what's said, it's what's really said. And what's really said is what's on your screen. You're different from us. You don't belong here. You're not intelligent or capable. People of color are lazy. They don't care. Your experiences, your perceptions are wrong. You're being too sensitive. You're a criminal. You're dangerous, deviant, up to no good. Racism doesn't exist. You're not a person of worth. What's really said are damaging messages. And I'll give you a perfect example. As a Black male, it is oftentimes said to me as I'm speaking or after I finish speaking, oh, wow, you're so articulate. But when it's said to me, it's not said as a compliment. It's said as a sense of surprise. But what's said to me is, wow, you're so articulate. But what's really said is, I didn't think that you would be. What's said to students when they walk on campus at nighttime and they're asked for their IDs, what's said is, can I see your ID? But what's really said is, I think you're here to steal something. So it's these underlying messages that make these powerful experiences with attribution ambiguity that further propel a race lighting experience. Now, on your screen are all different types of microaggressions that people can experience. And there's far more than this, but these are just some of the most common ones. One that you'll see is the first one on the top left-hand side, called an ascription of intelligence. This is when we assume that a person of color, based upon how they look, their phenotype, what they bring to the table, we assume automatically that they are less inferior, that they are less intelligent, that they are less capable of being able to do the work. This happens in business and industry. It happens in politics. It happens in healthcare. When you have an employee who's constantly second guessed for their ability to be able to do the work that they've been hired and capable of doing. The next one you see is an assumption of criminality. And this is when we assume that people of color are dangerous, deviant, up to no good, that they're going to cut some corners, that if they outperformed low expectations, that somehow they must have cut corners, right? That they must have somehow done the work wrong. And we see this not just in employee context, but also at the earliest levels of education, in preschool, in kindergarten, where we find in early childhood education, the greatest disparities in terms of school suspensions happen in the earliest levels of schooling, preschool through third grade. And we see young children who are suspended, who are expelled, who lose access to recess or the ability to participate in extracurricular programs after school. Why is that? Because of this assumption that they come from communities that are lesser than. They're assumed to be troublemakers, and therefore they are labeled with terms such as bad, physical, hyper, aggressive, defiant, deregulated. As a result, educators spend more time watching them for negative behaviors. And then what happens is that they single them out for punishment in ways that they don't do with other children. So let's say this, you've got 4 boys in kindergarten, they're on the schoolyard and they're throwing rocks against the fence. Now, should they be throwing rocks against the fence? No. But is that age appropriate behavior for a child in kindergarten? Of course it is. It's an opportunity for a conversation. It's an opportunity to provide guidance, but that's not what usually happens. What we find is that in that group of 4 boys, the Black male or the darker skinned Latino male or Native male is pulled out of that group and reprimanded when nothing else happens to the other children, to demonstrate to the other children what not to do, how not to act, how not to learn. They're used as an example of criminality and labeled and shaped early on. The third one is second-class citizens, and that's when we're treated as being lesser than. You can think about this as the person who is standing in line at a counter, let's say at the airport, and you're standing in line and there's multiple people are in line, but for some reason, though you're now made it to the front of the line, the person who's behind the counter calls the person behind you, and you bring it to their attention. Well, hey, I was standing here. I've been standing here this whole time. And they say, oh, well, I didn't recognize that you were standing and waiting in line. Or it's when you're a person of color and you're in a grocery store and people automatically come up to you to ask you where things are because they assume that you must be there because you're working. These are the ways in which second-class citizenship plays out in the lives of BIPOC. It can also be pathologizing culture. And I like to think about it as the they statements. We've all heard them before. They're lazy. They don't care. They're not really here to work. They're not really here to learn. Those kind of they statements shape people, their families, and their communities as being lesser than. There's lots of other different types in that. We could go on all day talking about different types of microaggressions. And this isn't necessarily a conversation on microaggressions, but recognizing that one way in which people can feel race-slighted is through the accumulation of microaggressions in an environment. That's a point of which I will come back to. Ultimately, all of these different things, these antecedents, this bias, these microaggressions lead to what we refer to as race-lighting. Now, on your screen, you can see a link to a brief that we've done on race-lighting. If you'd like to check out and learn more about it, you can go to the bmmcoalition.com/race-lighting. And ultimately, in order to understand race-lighting, we have to first step back and understand gaslighting. Now, many of you have heard the term gaslight. I assume that you have. And it comes from the 1938 play by Patrick Hamilton, Gaslight. And in this play, there's 2 main characters, Jack and Bella. And Jack in this play, he is the villain. And Bella is the person who's being victimized by Jack. And they're married. And they move into an affluent neighborhood. And Jack is intent upon making Bella feel as if she's losing her mind. So what does he do? There are pictures and paintings and images on the wall. He takes them down, he hides them, and he accuses Bella of stealing them. He does the same thing in the kitchen with knives and forks and spoons. He takes them and hides them. And whenever she asserts her innocence, he accuses her of lying, or he says, well, you know how you imagine things. But there's this other part of the house that Bella doesn't even know about. And Jack is often in there banging around looking for jewels. And she hears this noise in that part of the house that she's unaware of. And she brings it to Jack's attention. And he again gaslights her by saying, well, you know how you imagine things, right? Making it sound as if it's her, not him. But the title of the play, Gaslight, comes from when Jack is in that hidden part of the house. See, the house was lit by gas. And what that meant was that if you had a light on in one part of the house that Bella knew about, and this other part of the house that she didn't know about, what happened is that there was less gas to go around. The gas would become more diffuse. The light would flicker. The light would dim. and she would see it with her eyes. She would see this change in her environment, and she would see the same thing on the post out in the street, and she would bring it to his attention. And he again would say, well, you know how you imagine things. And so Jack was intent upon making Bella feel as if she was losing her mind. And when we think about the term gaslight, it's been talked about a lot in the popular media. There's a very popular book written by Robin Stern that talks about the gaslight effect. And it's been traditionally conceptualized as occurring in a heterosexual relationship between a man and a woman, where the man is victimizing the woman and intentionally using it to manipulate her psychologically. The term has not really been associated with other forms of marginality, except for a few studies that have focused on LGBTIQ plus students and how their experiences can serve to make them feel as if they're experiencing gaslighting. In the few studies that have been done that have talked about it in a racialized context, one of them talked about after Brown versus the Board of Education, where the government came in and it said that, hey, we are now integrating schools. And as a result, during that period, what happened is that many of the Black teachers who were in schools lost their jobs. And they lost their jobs because what the Supreme Court heard was not stories about how not being able to access a school in my local neighborhood was an inequality. What they heard is that schools with Black teachers and Black curriculum were lesser than. And so all these teachers ended up losing their jobs. And when they would assert how, you know, their abilities, when they would do that, it was to gaslight them and suggest that, oh, it was really not about the equality of the experience for students. It was about their ineffectiveness in teaching them. There's also a really great article written by Angelique Davis and Rose Ernst that talks about racial gaslighting, and it's really think about this in a case law context, where we can see different cases throughout history that have served, particularly for the Japanese community, to gaslight them or race-light them in some ways. Korematsu versus the United States, when we think about when the internment of the Japanese was happening during the World War, there was this case where Korematsu was like, you know, they should not be going to these internment camps. And the US government was responding saying, this isn't about race and racism. This is about protecting the nation. And so they were experiencing racial gaslighting in this case law context. But what we try to do is bring it down to an interpersonal level. How do we experience this really in the context of microaggressions, or whether they're micro assaults, micro insults, or micro invalidations? How does it impact us in our daily lives? And that brings us to Racelighting. It's the process whereby BIPOC question their own thoughts and actions due to systematically delivered racialized messages that make them second guess their own lived experiences and realities with racism. It's the experiences that people have that make them second guess themselves. It's a sense of doubt, that sense of disorientation. We refer to it as a process, and that's because there's two different types of racelighting. One is active, and I'll get to that in a moment, which is very similar to the play, where someone is intentionally doing something. Let's say that you're in an environment at work and someone has used a racial epithet and you bring it to their attention and they say, no, I never said that, right? They're intentionally misleading, right? That's racelighting. But it can also just be the accumulation of microaggressions in environment that can make people of color begin to second guess themselves and doubt themselves. And so I want to say to the people here today that if you're ever in a situation where because of this accumulation of microaggressions in environment, you begin to say to yourself, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought it was. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought it was. Maybe I don't belong here. It's that doubt, that disorientation, that's racelighting. And it can lead people of color to second guess our experiences. Did I really experience that? Our feelings. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Our capabilities. Maybe I'm not good enough. Our knowledge, our decision-making, our recollections, and even in some cases, our basic humanity. And that's why we have to change our culture. We have to change the ways that we approach our environments within work. Because if you say to yourself that you are experiencing racelighting, usually in my experience, if you've got to the point, because how racism works is it's meant to promote attribution and ambiguity. It's meant to make you feel hazy or disoriented. And if you finally get to the point where you say, I think this is occurring to me, then guess what? It probably is. On your screen are some different examples and signs of race lighting. Do you ever get to the point where you're second guessing yourself? You're feeling a sense of being disoriented and hazy, a general sense of unease and anxiety. You feel like you're under fire. I submitted this report, and then I submitted this thing, and I submitted this paper, and I feel like I'm constantly under fire because I'm getting nitpicked here, and I'm beginning to think that maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, or maybe this isn't really for me. And you're concerned that you just can't get things right. So maybe you start avoiding others. Maybe you have a sense of hopelessness. These are things that really occur to many people of color. And again, it can be active, right? Where there's a person who's perpetrating, who's intentionally sowing doubt and disorientation into the other person who they're doing this with, much like Jack did with Bella, right? Again, the use of a racial epithet, you bring it to their attention. You just said the N word, or you just said the K word, or another word, and they bring it to their attention. Like, I never said that. You misinterpreted. That's not what I said, right? And it's that sense of active race lighting that can occur. But it can also just be through an accumulation of microaggressions in the environment, through that ascription of intelligence, that assumption of criminality. And I just experience it so often that I begin to say, maybe it's not them, maybe it's me. Now, this all matters not simply because race lighting impacts us, but because it leads to other concepts as well. You can see on the right-hand side of your screen, imposter syndrome, stereotype threat. We're not going to get into those today, but I did want to touch on one other concept, which is called racial battle fatigue. It's a concept that was created by my colleague and friend, Dr. William Smith from the University of Utah. And if you've never heard of this term, racial battle fatigue, I would encourage you to Google him, to go look at anything that he has written, because it is one of the most powerful concepts in all of psychology. And essentially what it is a framework for making sense about how racism, even the subtle racism in our society, impacts us cognitively. It affects our ability to process information, to retain information. Think about how that can affect an employee who's went through training, right? And they're going through all these constant microaggressions in the environment, and they're like not retaining the information in the way they need. That's not a function of their ability. That's a function of the environment that's racist. Think about it also, it can affect us emotionally and physiologically. And I'm going to get to what that means. But he calls it racial battle fatigue because it's similar and akin in terms of what actually happens to us, or to our minds, to our emotions, to our bodies. It's akin to combat stress syndrome because you're in an environment where there's a persistent risk, where there's a persistent stress. And so one of the things that we know from William Smith is that racism can have a physical impact on our bodies. Many of you may have experienced a tension headache, backaches, an elevated heartbeat, an upset stomach, clenching your jaws at night, waking up because you've clenched them so hard with this, with a sense of a headache. It can be upset stomach, extreme fatigue, an inability to sleep. All these different things matter. And we don't just see it in employees at the highest levels of companies. We see it even in the earliest levels of education, where sometimes you have a young child. Let's say that they're in kindergarten. Let's say that they're a Black male child, and they're in an environment where the teacher is not supportive and is mean and is treating them as lesser than. And as a result, the other children see that, and now they think they should do the same. And in that environment, they know that there's something wrong, but they don't have the words to say to their parent, I don't feel a sense of belonging in this environment. They don't know how to say to their parent, I think I'm experiencing racial microaggressions. But what they do know how to say in the morning to their parent is, I don't want to go to school. And when the parent says to them, why don't you want to go to school? You keep saying this. And they say, because my stomach hurts. Because their body is having a physiological response to an environment that's unhealthy and unwell. But it can also be a psychological symptoms, constant anxiety and worrying. It can be loss of confidence, frustration, emotional and social withdrawal, anger and anger suppression. So ultimately, microaggressions and race lighting, they matter because it impacts us in ways that affect our performance, that affect our livelihood, and ultimately, as accumulated over time, can even impact our lives. And so let's talk just briefly as we get closer to the end of this conversation and closer to the time where we can really engage one another in the questions that you might have. What are some common ways in which race lighting actually occurs? So one is what we would refer to as resistant actions. And there's lots of different examples of it, but it's essentially when you maybe bring an issue or attention of race or racism to your employer, and you bring it up, or a student who might do it to and bring an issue to their faculty member or staff member in an institution. Lots of different ways people can deny that that's what occurred. One thing that we see is what's called reverse causality, where someone, let's say, going back to another example in early childhood, let's say you're in a preschool now, and you have a young child who's been pushed by another child, but they don't push back, right? They do the right thing. They go to the teacher and they tell the teacher, so-and-so pushed me. But because they are, let's say, a native male, the teacher doesn't console them and get on their feet and hug them. It doesn't go and try to talk to the other child and hold them accountable. What do? They victim blame. They say, what is it that you did to cause this to occur? We see the same thing with the Black Lives cases. Too often when someone has lost their life to police, there's questions that immediately circle around that individual. Questions that say, well, if he had only complied when he was complying, or if he had only done this when he actually had done that. But ultimately, it's reverse causality. It's blaming that victim. Another one is what you'll see on the bottom hand side of that area, public declarations of incompetence. This is a concept that comes from my colleague, Sean Harper. And one of the things that he has talked about is these public declarations of incompetence, where people say when they bring an issue of racism to them, like, oh, I don't know what you expect me to do. I grew up in an all-white community. I don't know how to engage these things, or I've never been trained to engage in these conversations. But it's so interesting to me. It's so interesting to me in that when you're in a context where a boss is expecting employees to do onboarding and learn all different types of information, or when you're in an educational setting and you have a faculty member in a classroom who's teaching new ideas, new theories, new theorems, asking for students to do simulations. And they do all these different types of things that expect them to learn new information. But it's only when it comes to diversity and inclusion that we throw our hands in the air and say, I don't know what you expect me to do. We would never accept a public declaration of incompetence in any other area, except for when it comes to race. It can be stereotype advancement, where people are pushing back on someone, and they're using stereotypes to do so. They're purposely advancing stereotypes that they're prone to criminality. Let's not promote him to that role because maybe he's going to cut corners, or that they're less intelligent or capable, as we talked about earlier, or the one that you see there that's very common, that they're emotionally unstable, right? I bring an issue to your attention, and your response is to assume that there's something wrong with me. But the title and subtitle of today's talk was on an inauthentic allyship. And there's two different ways in which it occurs, a pretense of protection and a semblance of support. Think about this as an example of when people are performative, when they are inauthentic allies, when they're not truly there to support you or to support your success. Inauthentic allyship refers to advancing the pretense that a person or entity supports or protects BIPOC when they actually do not. It's when they say that they're committed to people of color when they're not. You have a CEO who says that they're here for you, that they're here to support you, that they care about you and they care about your success. But that same CEO allows microaggressions to occur in their environment without ever holding people accountable. And they only show up to support when it's convenient for them or is in a way to make them look good, but doesn't actually demonstrate that there's anything more that's coming. Or When we find this, when there's organizations, they're doing fundraisers and they have a table that's focused on diversity, right? That's the only time that I ever hear from my employer that they care about me, because they want me to be at a table to make us look more diverse as a company than we actually are. It can be saying that we're more committed to making an action to improve the lives of people of color than we plan to. The best example that I have of this is after the murder of George Floyd, how many companies released statements? How many healthcare organizations released statements? How many universities and colleges released statements that say, we stand with the Black community. We reject anti-Blackness. We're here to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong. And then people waited to see what would come after the statement. What was the action that was coming? But there was no action coming because the statement was perceived as being the action. And in reality, that statement was nothing more but another line of a false promise, another example of performative inaction, another example of inauthentic allyship. And so if you released and saw an organization release a statement, but nothing more that came from that, that wasn't a true allyship. And maybe the organization was really dangerous. Maybe they went that next step and they held a listening session or a hearing circle to hear from employees. And the employees went to that and they expelled themselves and they talked about what had happened and how it made them feel. But that was it. Nothing else was coming. It was a conversation. And so we stopped at a statement or we stopped at a conversation, but we never did the actions that came along to go with it. We never committed to hiring more diverse employees. We never committed to training people within our organization. We never committed to renaming all the buildings and rooms within our organization that were named after people who don't look like the people that we serve. It was nothing more than a false promise. It was nothing more than Racelighting. Or it can be saying that we're doing more to advance people of color than we actually are. It can be when someone says, oh, we're doing a lot here to support people. You know, we just hired two Black employees. And you're thinking to yourself, we have 1,000 people who work there. How is that progress? Or it could be a healthcare organization that's now hired its first chief diversity officer, right? With no budget, no staff. And now they're responsible for trying to make sure that everything happens within that organization. It can be the college or high school that does a climate assessment, right? But that climate assessment has no desire to do any of the actions that are recommended within that climate assessment. It's merely to say that we did this climate assessment, we did that, but they didn't really have the work to do. And as someone just said, personally, I would rather have an accomplice than an ally. Inauthentic allyship is the worst possible type of being an ally. And so ultimately, we have to ask for more than what people are doing. Because what happens is that we see these things occur, and then it makes us begin to think to ourselves again that it's us, that something's wrong with us, that maybe we're demanding too much, that maybe we're asking too much, when really all we are asking for is dignity within our organizations. It can be these pretense of protection. One example that I have of this is we pretend like we're going to protect someone, but we don't. You can see examples on your screen. Doing something bad to a person of color and pretending like it was done to help or protect them. Let's say that you have an employee and they're in an office and those people in that office are treating them racist in a racist way. And they're sticking it out. They're fighting through it. They're continuing to do their job. And then the person who's over that department or over that area moves them to another area to protect them. But in reality, they weren't protecting them. They were trying to avoid having to intervene for themselves. It was a pretense of protection, but really it was a false narrative of protection. It can be telling a person of color that you will speak on their behalf if anything negative comes up in a conversation, but in reality, you're only their friend in private. You're not their friend in public. And this is what I say to people all the time. I don't need your support in private. I need your support in public. I don't need your support only when I'm there. I need your support even when I'm not there, when I'm not in the room, to protect and advance for myself. But it can also be the semblance of support. The individuals who are going to tell you that they're going to support you, that, hey, a department is saying that I'm going to, that you're on track to get a promotion, but in reality, there's no desire to actually promote you. Nothing is coming. But the other example that I have that's kind of a meld of protection and support is when you're in an environment and someone says something to you that's clearly racist, and you don't know how to respond. You're the person of color in that environment, and you're thinking, what do I do? And that individual there's other individuals in that room, and one of the individuals in that room is someone who's told you numerous times that they're your ally, that they're your accomplice, that they're here to support you and protect you, but they don't say anything. What do they do instead? They come to you afterwards when no one else is around. They say, oh, I heard what just happened. That's really bad. Is there anything I can do? I'm appalled. Are you okay? But ultimately, they had no desire to stand up for you because that's what was not in their best interest. They really weren't your friend. They just pretended to be. It can be touting oneself as an advocate for equity while actively marginalizing and silencing people of color that you work with. It can be a politician telling Black voters that they want to hear what they have to say, that they're here to support them, but there's no intention of following through. It can be a high-ranking school official pretending that they're going to fund schools more equitably and saying that, but then not doing so. It can be giving symbolic victories to people. Hey, they asked for all the buildings to go through a process where they could be named in honor of people who are from diverse communities, but instead of doing that, we gave them a desk that they could rename. We gave them a quad that they could rename. These are all examples of inauthentic allyship that really serve to gaslight, to race light people of color. They send us messages that you're crazy, that it's you, it's something about you, that you're the problem, that you're not good enough, that you're not smart enough. And really, it says more not about you, but about their own frailties, about their own insecurities, about their own inauthentic allyship. So as I conclude, I wanted to offer some things in terms of organizations and people. What can we do about this? First, if you're an individual who's experiencing race lighting, first thing I would say is that you have to begin to practice radical self-care. And what we mean when we say radical self-care is that self-care in and of itself is one thing. But when you're in an environment that's racist, it doesn't want you to take care of yourself. And so it's radical in that self-care can be a form of resistance against an environment of oppression. For me, what I do is I box. I box multiple times a day. And tomorrow night, I'll be sparring with my friends. Why do I do so? Because it's a way for me to expel the accumulation of racial battle fatigue that I have within my own work. And if for any of you who end up following me on Instagram, you'll see that I'm obsessive with it because it's a way for me to make sure that I'm being centered. Some people meditate. I also pray. Some people go for long walks. Some people join organizations. Whatever you do that puts you in that place where you can recharge and be in an environment where you can expel what is happening to you, you have to do that. You have to practice that radical self-care. We also have to continue to learn about these topics, microaggressions, race lighting, racial battle fatigue, because the more we learn, the more we can understand. And the more we understand, the more we can fight. And the more we fight, the more we can change. We also have to learn about the places and spaces where race lighting is more likely to occur. Maybe it's when I'm in this specific office or when I'm engaging this specific person. And we have to do that so that we can transition to more safer places and spaces to protect ourselves. And in doing that, we want to find ourselves in communities with other individuals who may look like us or at the very least care about us and will tell us it's not you, it's them. That you are of worth, that you are a person of dignity and deserve dignity, that you are a person who is cared about, you are a person that's loved, that you are capable of doing the work that you're doing. Sometimes we need those validating messages. We need that reassurance because race lighting will make us question ourselves, just like Bella was questioned in Gaslight. And ultimately, it's only when we have those allies of ours, those accomplices that tell us what we need to hear, that we can do what needs to be done. And lastly, I would say you need to document your experiences. And documenting comes in different ways. For me, I journal. When I experience issues of racism and discrimination, I write about it. In fact, I write under a pen name, which I won't mention here, but I write under a pen name where I share these experiences so that it's cathartic for me, but it's also informative for the public. Also, people can document because sometimes the best way to handle it is to bring it through a formal process. That may be the right thing to do in some cases. It may not be the right thing to do in other cases, but ultimately it's cathartic to expel what is being forced within your body. Again, racial battle fatigue is cognitive, it's psychological, and it can be physical. And lastly, I would conclude with some recommendations for organizations. First, if someone comes and tells you that this is what they're experiencing, that this overwhelming sense of doubt and disorientation, that they're saying to themselves, maybe it's me, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'm not smart enough, believe what they say. Believe what they say. Because if they've gotten to the point where they can actually say that to you, it means that it's probably true. You have to establish within your organization, no matter what organization you have, a way of handling bias incidents when they occur. There's a way of reporting it, that there's a system of follow-up, that there's a process that people are aware of, and that process is transparent, that there's a system of accountability. If you're in an organization that constantly releases statements in support of George Floyd, against anti-Asian discrimination, in support of our Native communities, whatever it might be, that you stop doing statements that have no action. Statements without action are, again, a false promise. That you establish employee resource groups or people resource groups, or there's lots of different terminology that can be used for them, but groups that bring together employees of different backgrounds, of different characteristics, within communities of individuals who share those same characteristics. A Black resource group, a Latinx resource group, a Native resource group, a Pride resource group, a Jewish resource group, so that people can be in community with one another and share with one another what they're experiencing, but also have the other individuals who in the room who can say, it's not you. You are intelligent. You are capable. You are a person that's loved. We also have other recommendations here, but at this point, I'd like to just conclude this time and just encourage you to remember one very important thing. Racelighting is real. It occurs, it affects all of us. And so therefore, one thing, we have to be committed to changing our organizations. Because if we don't change our organizations, they'll never be as good as they could be in serving the people who need the support that they need to be the best possible themselves in their environments. I appreciate this opportunity and looking forward to questions you might have in the remaining time that we have together. Thank you. So the first question that I see, how do we translate racelighting within the communication and understanding level of our children? I think that you look for the signs of it. Again, those signs are really going to be more emblematic of racial battle fatigue. So you have a child who's saying that they don't want to go to school, or they have an upset stomach, or during recess time, they want to sit on the side. They don't want to engage with the other children, right? Those are cognitive, psychological, and physiological responses to an environment. More often, what you'll see is in examples of racelighting within parents. Parents who have children, let's say that they have a child named Jacob, and Jacob shows up to school and he is used as an example of what not to be. And let's say that Jacob is at his desk and he is in kindergarten, he's tapping his pencil. Now, that's an age-appropriate behavior for a child in kindergarten, but the teacher sees him and other children tapping their pencils, but they yell at Jacob. Then they get ready to go out for recess and children are standing in line. And there's some children who are out of line. Jacob happens to be one of them, but there's 5, 6 other kids who are too. But the teacher doesn't ask the other kids to get back in line. She yells at Jacob to use him as an example. And then there's the notes that go home to Jacob's parents, the little notes at first, and then larger notes constantly every day, picking at them. Jacob did this, Jacob did that. And then the parents start to say to themselves, maybe we didn't prepare him. And they hear these words used around Jacob, that he's bad, that he's a troublemaker. And they start to say to themselves, maybe he is bad. Maybe he is a troublemaker. And it's that doubt, that disorientation that we have to teach to the parents to recognize that it's not them, that it's oftentimes the educators. Many of you may have heard a term from W. Edward Deming and Paul Batalden. It says that every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. There are some systems that are perfectly designed to race light people of color. Let's see if there's another question that comes up. Have you seen research on race lighting when folks of color are denied tenure based on some type of matrix where so many folks of color can be promoted? There is an example of a study that we've come across that does talk about this to some extent. And it's looking at race lighting among scientists of color in education. And it is written by, pulling it up, Roberts, no, not Roberts and Andrews. It is, here we go, Rodriguez et al. And it's it talks about gaslighting as a framework to discuss the experience of women of color scientists. Rodriguez, Rodrigues, and it's a 2021 piece that was written that talks about some of this in a slightly different context, but still kind of within this realm of kind of racialized gaslighting. And so ultimately, we do know that this occurs. The next question says, how do we get this information also into our churches and religious organizations? Still, the most segregated day of the week is Sunday morning. I totally agree. I think that what you do is that you ask your pastor or your imam or your rabbi, whoever the leader is of your church, you ask if you can have a conversation on this topic. You have all now had the opportunity to learn a little bit about this term that we've coined called race lighting. I would encourage you to share it widely, to have conversations on it. The brief that we put in the link, the bmmcoalition.com/race lighting, provides lots of different resources and articles that relate to this. And I would encourage you to have those conversations in those spaces as well. Race lighting also occurs in religious contexts as well. Can you explain build the Underground Railroad? I didn't get to all the recommendations because of time, but one individual is asking for that. And so I will offer this. And this is actually a recommendation that's really centered in the field of education, though I think it could probably be used in a lot of other contexts. So let's think about the Underground Railroad. What was the Underground Railroad? Well, we had those who were enslaved in the South who were escaping to the North. But you couldn't just stop at any old house along the way, right? If you were to do so, you would have been sent back and you would have been maimed, you would have been killed, your family would have been separated, and they may have already been separated anyhow, right? And so ultimately, there was individuals who were a network of support along the way. Go to this house, right? And go to the back and they'll protect you. And then meet this person and they'll bring you up the river to this person, and go up 4 more clicks and on the left-hand side, you'll see a shack that's green. Stay there for the evening. Someone will be there to get you in the morning. It was a network of people and places that basically brought people to safety. Within our own organizations, we can't just assume that everyone will serve people with dignity and respect. In an education context, for example, if I have a student who's in need of financial resources, I can't just say go to financial aid, because if they go to financial aid, they may be treated with disrespect. I can't say just go to career services because they might be treated with disrespect. I can't just say go to tutoring because they may have a tutor who innately believes that they don't have the ability to learn. And that's not a recipe for success, because no one has ever risen to low expectations. And so what do I do instead? I bring them to a person who I know will care about them and their success in the same ways that I will, who won't microaggress them, who won't race light them, who won't put them down. I bring them to Allison in financial aid because I know that Allison will care about them. And if I can even do so in person, that's even better. In fact, in education, we talk about this concept called a warm handoff. A warm handoff means that you have one person who's warm and caring and validating, who then brings them to another person who's warm and caring and validating, because we don't believe that one person or two people can create an environment where a student succeeds, but it takes a village. You need an environment based upon our research of 4 or 5 individuals who will validate them in their success. That concept is called a warm handoff. But just remember this, you can't do a warm handoff to a cold person. It has to be to someone who cares about their success in the same ways that you will. Another person has asked, how do we begin to change this negative culture that is systemic? What you are saying, Dr. Wood, is real and psychologically painful. I think the first thing we do is we begin to have conversations on these topics. We have to have these conversations within our organization. If you look on the internet, you can find videos where we've talked about Racelighting. There's this summit that's taking place. I'm sure that there's be a way to access some of this information afterwards. There's briefs. You have to have those conversations within your organization. But let's also remember this, that training doesn't always work. Training only works for the willing. It doesn't work for the unwilling. So that's why there's a lot of individuals who have critiqued implicit bias trainings lately, saying implicit bias trainings don't work. I disagree for 2 different reasons. Implicit bias trainings do work, but they work for those who are willing to learn and change and who have the desire to do so. The second thing is implicit bias isn't going to impact anti-Blackness. You have to have a training on anti-Blackness to impact a training on anti-Blackness. Implicit bias isn't going to impact microaggressions. You have to have trainings on microaggressions to impact microaggressions. So ultimately, sometimes we see that you prescribe the wrong medicine for the problem. But ultimately, you have to approach it in that way. Have those conversations within your organization and then begin to create systems to hold people accountable. Because without accountability, the issues themselves will never change. Someone asked also as a follow-up, what do you do when HR is the fuel behind the Racelighting? I think you call attention to that. I think that it is absolutely true that some people within HR contexts will advance Racelighting themselves, because in their mind, their job and their responsibility is to protect the organization. So they can't tell you that the real reason you're being let go is that your boss doesn't like you and that there's nothing about your performance. They have to root it in performance and say, well, it's about this that you did and that you did, when you know that you didn't, because in their mind, their job is to protect the organization. But what I would say is that is an unethical way to practice human resources. Ultimately, we have to be honest. We have to be transparent. And if there's something that we can't say or we don't want to say what the actual truth is, then don't lie to people. Simply say that the organization is moving in a different direction. But too often what happens is that we race-light people and we make them second guess themselves. And that has an impact on their psychological safety and the psychological safety of others within that organization. Someone said, any references to read on these issues? Absolutely. If you go to bmmcoalition.com/racelighting, you'll see at the bottom of the screen a number of different resources. In addition to that, we have, in Diverse Issues in Higher Education is co-hosting this or is a co-sponsor on this event. We've published, my colleague Frank Harris and I, an article that talks about Racelighting. I also have one, if you search Racelighting in Psychology Today, that talks about different types of Racelighting, active Racelighting, passive Racelighting, defensive Racelighting. I would say in general, if you also do a web search, that you'll see different conversations that we've had that have been recorded on this topic as well. So ultimately, there's lots of resources. But what I will say is this: we are going to be hosting in a few months a conversation on Racelighting that's going to be focused on training the trainer, to train people to how to have these conversations within their own organizations. The College Futures Foundation has provided us with a small amount of resources to be able to do this. And we have a whole professional development curriculum and resources that we're going to be unveiling as part of that. Tondra Richardson, who is one of the individuals putting on this event, I'm going to be sharing that information with her. And I hope that she'll have the opportunity to be able to share either through her social media networks or other networks that information. You can also, again, follow me on social media at Dr. Luke Wood. That's on Instagram, that's on Twitter, that's on Facebook, and we'll be advertising that event in short order as well. At this point, we're at time, and I want to make sure that other presenters have the opportunity to be able to engage you as well. So I just want to conclude by thanking you for being part of this conversation, for leaning into the uncomfortableness of what we're talking about, and to encourage you to talk about race lighting throughout the day. It's an important topic because it impacts us psychologically, cognitively, and physiologically. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Racial battle fatigue, race lighting, these are new concepts to me, and they make so much sense as you explain them. From the chat, I saw others sharing that same sentiment. We really appreciate you using your energy and time to educate us and describe something that many here have undoubtedly either witnessed or experienced themselves. Understanding what race lighting is and realizing there's a term to validate the impact on those that it affects, so empowering. Thank you for enlightening us today. Hey humans, my name's Craig Mahaffey, and I currently work as a Disability Services Advisor at the Office of Equity and Inclusion here at the University of Phoenix. I'm also pursuing my Master of Science in Counseling in the Clinical Mental Health Counseling program here at the university and serve on the board of directors of the Arizona Counseling Association, where we provide support to Arizona's counselors and other counselors in training. This talk was incredible, Dr. Wood. I will completely be taking these nuggets with me, both in my current profession and in my future career. Well, now that we're 3 days into the summit, I definitely am experiencing a bit of overwhelm with the amount of information that all of us are consuming. At the same time, though, I'm eager to learn more and hope you are too. At this time, we're going to be releasing you all to take a break. We'll return here at 10:45 for the general sessions. Please use this as an opportunity to take a moment to provide yourself with a kindness that you might need at this time. Maybe some deep breathing, a hug, a bathroom break, or a quick snack. Please make sure that you're taking care of your body, mind, and soul as we move through some of these potentially triggering topics. When we return from the break, you're going to be able to choose from one of the different industry focused tracks. The navigation panel is located on the left side of your browser. You'll click on the Stages option to access one of the three upcoming sessions. We've got Leadership and Management, Understanding and Creating Psychological Safety at Work, Healthcare, Fostering Psychological Safety in Healthcare, and Education, Fostering Psychological Safety in an Educational Environment. And then to wrap up the day, please join us to learn about bridging the gap, building inclusivity through collaborative research. May you all be well and treat yourself with kindness during this break. We look forward to seeing you back here at 10:45 in about 12 minutes. Take care.